meeting on July 22nd of the Environmental Policy Commission at Village Hall. And all the currently seated commissioners are present, plus our secretary. Village planner's here as a guest, thank you. And as I was saying, so I did put in some phone calls, and probably the most promising response was from the Climate Action Committee. They felt they could get us some names. I spoke with Eric Roth at the Mohawk Preserve, who indicated he'd network there. And so we'll see what sort of response we get from there.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Does anybody, thoughts on posting on the Facebook group, the New Paltz Facebook group? Just, is anybody interested in the village of doing this?
Oh, yeah, it seems to be, I don't check that one very often, but whenever I do, I'm surprised because I see things that I normally wouldn't find out. I think, wow, I wish there was a village website that actually had, of course there's a lot of junk on there too.
Right.
Yeah.
Occasionally there's.
If we were going to find people, that would be a decent place.
So nobody's
to go.
opposed to me posting?
Please do.
something?
No.
All right.
Can I have the agenda?
Oh, yeah.
I haven't pulled up. so I'm
Good, okay, cool. A copy?
I mean, we could even have a page,
Actually, I'm gonna take one.
a page for the commission, Facebook page for the commission. I had one a long time ago, and I think it's still floating around in the Facebook cosmic debris somewhere.
I don't do Facebook, but you're all welcome to,
That's
sounds good to me.
something I also wondered, because we have the commission listed on the village webpage, but there's no means for people to submit communications or for us to communicate with us.
The website is being redesigned. I have a meeting with the website designer tomorrow. So if you would like a page to have more information, I think that's totally possible. We'd have to double check. But
Right.
It used to be
this
that
would be
every
the time.
committee and commission had a page.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, but since we were just created, we just probably slipped through the cracks.
Well, we also had an email address once upon a time. It was just encc@villageofnewpaltz.org, and it would go to you, or whoever agreed to answer the email came in.
So tomorrow night, I'll ask for a website, some ability to contact, and a webpage, and an email address.
Sure.
Yes,
I
that
mean, I
would
have
work.
plenty of things to upload. I could make an instant web page if you wanted it. Just transfer
Well, let's,
everything from.
Let's get them to give us the means first, and then we can start filling it up.
It might also be something to consider in the future if we wanted to do a Facebook page that would link to the New Paltz page, and I'm sure a lot of the same people would have interest in that. The only problem with Facebook is you have that sort of invite, accept thing where there would have to be people that were the administrators for the page, so,
I don't know how you guys feel about it, and I'm not trying to push any agenda, but Dan might want, if we had Dan come to a meeting, Dan runs a lot of Facebook groups and Facebook pages for different political people, but also for different groups for school and things like that. He knows a lot about outreach on Facebook and just how to use it to really reach people. So he might, I'm sure he'd be willing to come and talk to us about some suggestions.
Okay, let's put this on. And at the bottom of the agenda, I start making a list of things for the next agenda. So I'll put Facebook page, ? Dan Torres report, ?
I'll ask him if he wants.
Okay. Send around a couple things. Send around some background information on SECRA. Not too much in terms of documentation this month around. Is there anything anybody had any questions about? Okay. Well, why don't we go right into the plastic bag ban? John, let me just quickly review what Kathy Cartagena had to say, and then you sent out an email this afternoon. So the idea was, if we ban plastic bags in the village, is that going to have some bad effect on people who are struggling economically? And I was asked to contact family of New Paltz. Kathy Cartagena said that she has already told their clients that they need to supply their own bags or boxes before I even called her. So at one point, someone was giving them free plastic bags for them to use. She hasn't been doing that. and is totally comfortable with just saying, bring your own bags, whether they're plastic, whether they're cloth, whether they're cardboard boxes, and they've already put that into place. So, so no issues there. So John, you want to talk about what you sent around, or
Yeah,
whatever
there
you want to
was
talk about?
a request when we were talking about what proposals we might be making for a mitigation plan. So I reached out to a number of people, one being Elizabeth Poyet from Larchmont. I also was in contact with some people from Rye. I was told that I would be receiving a mitigation plan. What I received instead looks like opposition research, which is one aspect of, but not all of what would be in the mitigation plan. But so there was some opposition research that I found from Larchmont in terms of what they encountered enacting the same legislation, and then seeing that there might be a need for additional information, I went and looked for other things. I received from, let me just see what I sent out. Yeah, there was some information from Connecticut, from Westport, Connecticut, where they've also enacted the same law with the same language. And they sent me everything that, all of the paperwork that they amassed, or what appears to me to be all of the paperwork that they amassed in regards to the enactment of the law. Their public minutes, the minutes for a public hearing, the people that signed up, some of their concerns, letters that they received, and all of that was in the email that I sent out. In addition to that, and I think that's probably very useful, is item number 5 in a 137-page document. So 40 odd pages of that is all related to the plastic bag ban. I have not, in full disclosure, had a chance to read every single page of it, but it does seem like it's useful information. The other thing that I found that may or may not be of use, and so my question to everyone would be, and Jason is here as well, so my question to him would be what would be useful for you to have. There was a study, it looks like a senior thesis that was done by a group of people at Cal Polytech about hazards and mitigations for plastic bag bans. It appears to be rather broad in that it addresses concerns from Ireland. It addresses in some detail concerns from San Diego, which was sort of an incubator for this kind of thing. It's very detailed, but very broad. So I don't know to what degree that would or would not be useful for submission tomorrow in terms of a quote-unquote mitigation plan. So that's what I have.
What is it that needs mitigating?
I'm not exactly sure. Sally Rhodes made a request for a mitigation plan at the last meeting when we made when we told her what our proposals might be. So I just kind of went out with that in mind to find what I could. And that's what I told you.
Mitigation is undoing some harm.
Yeah, the mitigation, I use the word mitigation in my notice to the village board that was handed out that day, and it says equity issue mitigation plan. And we were talking about people without means.
My thought would be impact on people for whom it would have a negative impact, being people with less means, and the business community, which I do have.
Don't communities generally switch to non-plastic bags?
Yep.
Just cellulose-based or paper?
Well, I think businesses would probably do that. Individuals would be encouraged to purchase reusable bags.
Right.
But businesses would probably would still
So
have to give out
it's not that
something.
people are going without it, or that they're that much more expensive. I
No.
mean, even a nickel a bag is, So what are we what are we really mitigating?
I don't know if it was in terms of future potential issues that might arise in terms of legality or challenges to the legality. There's information on that too. The opposition research, there was some issue, it appears, in Larchmont, where they were confronted with some lobbyist of some nature who began to provide opposing viewpoints and attempted to gin up opposition to the ban. So there's the arguments that are against it, which I could talk about or not.
Well, I'd say, honestly, in terms of efficiency, the best way to move forward would be for the commission to write the law that they want, that they would want to see passed if they were the village board, and simply respond, to the request for a mitigation plan with the point that there's not a need for one, because there are other alternatives available, and this is just, or, you know, whatever the answer is, you know, if there's, and there's a good chance this will just pass without much public opposition, so we won't need any opposition research or any of the other stuff, but it's good to have it reserved if we do need it, to anticipate arguments.
Yeah, the two things that came up at the meeting were the equity issue, as I put it, but and also just the issue. A lot of times you'll see people walking from supermarkets down Main Street, students and other people with lots of plastic bags. It doesn't work that well with paper bags. So we brought that up as an example.
So there'll be cellulose bags at 5th grade instead.
Yeah.
Well, also the reusable bags, like we had talked about doing, like they have the advertisement cards where you can pay to be on the card, and we talked about maybe getting different businesses together to make a bag to contribute. Those would be even sturdier to walk down Main Street with. You know, reusable bags are going to be a lot easier than those plastic bags which break, you know. Yeah, they hold more. So I mean, like if that's something that we can make available to the community, you know.
What would you want them? We did this years ago with the, what was it called? Green Works, yes. And there was a big discussion because you can get the polyethylene bags, or those are the cheaper ones. They're much cheaper, but they're made in China usually, and they're made out of a petroleum product, which isn't necessarily environmentally friendly. And then you can get the canvas ones, which of course you can get, you know, organic cotton, whatever, and then those are more expensive. So it's kind of like you have to figure out what you want to do.
Well, I guess like I brought this up last week. Those like placemats with the different ads that businesses contribute
Yes.
money. So what if we got 50 local or 25 local businesses to contribute X amount of dollars to have their logo or their advertisement on this bag? We use that money, pool it, see what we can get from a more environmentally friendly company to make those bags.
Yeah, that's what they did. I don't know how long ago it's been since they've done a bag, but they got people. It's Teresa Fall.
Okay.
You know, she did that. I don't know how many years ago it was. It was a bunch of years ago.
Maybe we could even have like an event for it. Like let's say hypothetically, law passes, we are able to get bags to give to people. We have an event, like celebrating the law, it could be at the recycling center, it could be something that's really promoting what we're going for.
Or correlate it with a pre-existing event.
Yeah. Give out the bags, encourage people to recycle, encouraging all these things.
And it also wouldn't surprise me if some places considered it an additional revenue stream and printed bags of their own with their logo or whatever information, and then sold the bags to those who weren't equipped with their own at the point of sale, which would be an advantageous thing for businesses to do.
Or if we sell them, we might be able to get some businesses to get on board, obviously not chains, but like smaller local businesses, 5% off, or, if you're using this bag,
And to your point, John, earlier, I think our role, as I understand it, is to have these conversations and go through the background information and come up with a recommendation. If they ask questions, we should have the answers and be ready for it. But I don't think we should throw a lot of supporting material at them if we want to have a vote this year.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
All right, so let it be noted then that supporting materials are available upon request.
Yeah. And then we do have them, and we've talked about them, and we're ready to address that. So do we want to, as a commission, recommend to the village board that you've given them language from other municipalities? We want to suggest they pull the trigger on this?
I would suggest that they do and stay as close to the existing language as humanly possible. In communicating with Elizabeth Poyet from Larchmont, she spoke to the benefits and wisdom of everyone using the same language, and that was the language that was generated, I believe it was from Westport specifically, and then found its way into New York. So,
Okay, and all 5 municipalities, the laws you showed them were the same, right?
with slight variations in terms of who would enforce the
Okay.
but the core language of the law is exactly the same in each of those municipalities.
So just send an email with the actual Word version of the law that you want to, and actually I'll just tell you the email address to send it to. Just email the entire village board, which is mayor@villageofnewpaltz.org, deputy mayor Rossler@gmail.
I think we handed those out hard copies at the last village meeting. Everyone's had those. Everyone's had those to look at. Yeah, so it's all that pre-work's been done.
Good. So just email the whole village board and explain what it is you'd like and attach it, and then I'll forward it on to the village attorney for him to look at and change if he needs to, and we'll move from there.
Yeah, I'll plan to be there tomorrow night, and I'll report out that we want them to make this happen, and that's our recommendation. All right. So, anything else that's important for you to address here at the meeting? Because you mentioned you're having some issues.
I only had one question about Secra, but we're not there yet.
Well, let's go there.
My only question was, would there ever be an event in which having that Title I distinctions, Title I was the distinction that they wanted to make for
Type 1.
Type 1, I'm sorry, Type 1. Would there be an instance in which having that restriction where you have to do the report would be a problem for the town in terms of in the event of an emergency, or would there be any,
Yeah.
you understand?
Not for emergencies, all zoning laws are suspended
Okay.
for in emergencies, so we could take and blast and do whatever we want if we need to.
And I
So
guess
that's not a concern.
for the record on TV, and not everyone has seen the emails, could you explain what this change is and what you're proposing?
Right. The state environmental quality review, and Brenda, did you get introduced?
Yes.
Okay, good. Jump in if I forget something or misspeak, but the State Environmental Quality Review Act is the New York State law that governs how things get built. So planning boards generally deal with it most, and zoning boards of appeals. When you go to build something, you basically have to, the goal of seeker is the acronym for the law. The goal of seeker is that there should be no net adverse environmental impact because of development. That's the stated goal. In the real world, obviously, development is causing a lot more problems than it's causing environmental problems. But for our purposes, what happens is when you want to build something, one of the first things you do is make various determinations, and I won't get into all of them. One of them is whether it's a type 1 action, a type 2 action, or an unlisted action. All development projects and things like development projects, like creating a new park, for instance, would are fall in one of those three categories: type 1, type 2, or unlisted. Type 1 are the ones that require the most environmental review. Type 2, which include single-family homes, for instance, require minimal environmental review, if any. And unlisted actions, what are unlisted actions? I'm blanking on that. That's just the catch-all for things that aren't type 1 or type 2, and you have to make a case-by-case
Right.
judgment. Yeah, okay. So there's a statewide list of these, and so on that statewide list of type 2 actions are single-family homes. What's this on the statewide list for type 1 action? Wetlands greater than 12.4 acres?
That sounds right.
Is that? Yeah, so that's the state wetland size. That's the size of wetlands the state protects. In that, the secret law, there's a provision that allows municipalities to create their own lists of type 1 and type 2 actions. And I believe it also allows you to move an item from unlisted or type 2 into the type 1 list. Because there's a principle in state law as part of the home rule concept, that lower levels of government can be more restrictive in their laws, but never less. So the state regulates wetlands of 12.4 acres or more. That means the village can regulate wetlands. We can write a law that regulates wetlands of 1 acre or more, so it's more restrictive. But we can't say we're only going to regulate wetlands of 100 acres or more. You can't override state law. So you can make it more restrictive, but never less. So, using that principle, municipalities can create their own lists of type 1 actions, or type 2 actions, I suppose. The village already has several of these, including one that involves clearing and grading, I believe, one that involves certain steep slopes, I think, and one that involves blasting. These are all type 1 actions in the village code, but not type 1 actions in state law. So I saw it in this and this isn't old, I've been pushing this for over a year. We can use this as a tool for environmental protection, basically. Now, there's a section of SECR that outlines something called a critical environmental area. And a critical environmental area is something that's mapped so that it has specific boundaries and is adopted by resolution of the municipality. And when you adopt a certain area as a critical environmental area, it identifies it for planning purposes, but the only real environmental, and this is where I might get hazy if you remember anything about these things, one of the real protections that critical environmental areas have comes through this group. And I know I'm meandering a little bit, but I'll bring it around. So, if a municipality has an environmental board as opposed to a commission, and I'll explain how you become a board in a second. Any development that impacts a critical environmental area has to be referred by the planning board to the environmental board for formal comment. If the planning board goes against what the environmental board says, that's been used in courts as grounds to overturn the decision of the planning board in Article 78 lawsuits. And an Article 78 lawsuit is basically a lawsuit or a violation of secret rules. To become an environmental board, you need to have, the municipality needs to have an open space inventory that's been adopted by resolution of the village board. We actually basically have that and we're working on that. And can you say a little bit?
We're close to having a inventory already. I just need to finish mapping it, and then it's done.
So we're going to have the next step in turning you, raising you from a commission to a board with some regulatory authority. So, which brings me back to the Type 1 law, because this law also defines every wetland and watercourse in the village as a critical environmental area. So once this inventory is done and we establish as a board, you will have some oversight over everything that's mapped in this law. The map that's in front of you comes from a study, and I can get copies of it to, actually Don has access to it through that website that I gave you, you and Andrea access
The
to.
Google group?
No, the dummy, the website I started to make for the village that has all those documents on it,
Yeah,
the Google site.
yeah.
There's a 2007 Hudsonia Limited, it's a nonprofit scientific organization at BARD, that mapped all the potential wetlands in the village. So there's like a 30-page report that comes with it. But this, what's in front of you, and you should have copies of the map as well as the law in purple.
You may have sent those to us by email.
Okay.
Yeah, I forwarded it.
Is it
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, that's it. That map is a map that I made. I just basically traced the Hudsonia map because the Hudsonia map is very hard to read. So that shows you every a parcel that has a stream, a wetland, or a buffer, and I can't remember the buffer size. So those would become critical environmental areas and automatically type 1 actions if you have a development that's on one of those parcels. So it basically, rather than write a wetlands protection law, like most communities write a wetlands protection law that just covers the whole town and it applies to every development, you have to hire someone to come in and see whether there's wetlands on your property before, for every project. The village is small enough that we could afford to figure out every place where there even might be wetlands and water courses. Because this map doesn't show where there are wetlands, it shows where there might be. Some of this might just be drainage ditches, and not streams, or, just ecologically dead instead of, whatever, having the right indicator species and soil types and such. So, to give you an example, the town of New Paltz has, their wetlands protection law is 90 pages long, with I think 30 pages of definitions alone, to protect wetlands in the 40 square miles around us. This is basically an attempt to have a more elegant and simple way to protect wetlands without having to go that route. By making them critical environmental areas, and also then therefore all critical environmental areas are type 1 actions, in addition to us adding it to our local list. It requires a higher level of environmental review. So I think Brenda gave you 2 forms. One is the short form, environmental assessment form, EAF for short, and the other is the long form. So the short form, everyone has to fill out, basically, and tell us to see what the environmental impact will be. Type 1 actions must fill out the long form. And at that point, with that long form EAF filled out, because of the wetland, the planning board then has the discretion to do things like have a wetlands inspector put on retainer through their escrow account, and have a developer pay to have a scientist go out and test whether there are wetlands on the property. They have the right to require that the applicant fill out a complete environmental impact statement, which is that the entire? I thought that was multiple volumes.
Well, I
What's
picked
your
the
question,
smallest
Nancy?
one.
Is that, yeah, so just to show you what an EIS looks like, that's a draft environmental impact statement. So the
And this
planning,
is the smallest one I could find.
yeah, the planning board has the right to require that amount of research for any parcel on that list on that map.
So the essential difference is in the amount of research that any potential developer would have to do. They currently only hypothetically would have to fill out the short environmental assessment form.
Right.
And now, by making it a critical environmental area, they would have to do the complete environmental assessment.
And also currently the planning board has some leeway to basically disregard wetlands altogether. I mean, the planning board could approve a plan that completely paved under the wetland, to my knowledge. I mean, if there's no law, if it's less than 12.4 acres, the state doesn't care, and if it's not federally designated, which most of ours aren't, there's nothing to protect wetlands or streams at all. You could divert the streams, you could culvert them, you could. Well, actually, no. Streams under current law are protected by a 35-foot buffer. You can't go within 35 feet of the stream.
All right, so I'm going at this same thought as John, but different process. So we're going from 12.4 acres protected to
Everything.
Oh.
everything. Okay, so what is the pushback? If we come to the village board tomorrow night and talk about this, what is the argument against it? Can you articulate that?
There's been, and maybe you can step in here, as part of this process, we've had to refer this law to the county planning board and the village planning board.
And they oppose it.
They don't oppose it, they sort of oppose it, and for reasons that don't make sense.
They say that it will create an unnecessary administrative burden.
Right. Yet at the same time recommend passing a wetlands protection law that would basically get to the same end. So it could, and is it accurate to say that this law gets us where we want to go in one page, where we get to the same place with 90 pages of the wetlands law?
Right.
we'd end up at the same place as the planning process. Like the same things would happen in front of the planning board with a 90-page law or this.
Yes.
This is just a simpler way to do it.
I have a question. What is our, this might be stupid, this might have come from them. What does the New Paltz Planning Board think about this? They know about this?
Yeah, the New Paltz Planning Board, their attorney wrote their opinion, and I actually wrote a response. I've never sent it, but I sent it to a couple other people. What was the gist of George's? He also suggested a traditional wetlands protection law, and I can't remember. He had some other points, but they didn't really.
He wasn't clear on the critical environmental area because it seemed like it was doing the same thing as a type 1 action. And
Right.
And it is, that's the point. Right?
It is,
Exactly.
and redundancy isn't bad.
And I think his main argument was we could do something like the town.
Yeah.
It seems like the argument against it would be almost like an aesthetic problem where one is a protection and the other is the imposition of new requirements for
Right.
the process. You know what I mean? It's almost, you're getting to the same place,
Well, you know,
but one appears to be, punishing while the other appears to be protecting, but you're
Right.
getting to the same.
But we're not asking you to fill out the entire environmental impact statement. And we're asking for 13 pages.
Mhm.
and that's only if you have if you're on one of these parcels. And that's the thing is that honestly the town needs that 90-page wetlands law probably. And I worked on it. I worked on the early drafts of that, and I think it was the 10th draft, and it was 2001, and it's just being passed now. And because they have so much land, they don't know where everything is. So basically, we get to use this It's basically a shortcut to the same endpoint, and we get to use it because we know exactly where everything is. So we basically exempt 90% of the village from the law. Whereas if anyone in the town has to abide by the town wetland law, they have to show that that there's no wetlands on the property, and it doesn't matter where they live.
The Hudsonia map suggests where there may be wetlands. Would then the burden of determining whether or not something is a wetland befalls anyone who might develop on it? That's not something that could
Correct.
come back and say, because it's so vague as to whether or not it is a wetland. That doesn't-
It would be added to the short list of standard studies that we require every significant applicant. I mean, there's applicants with a planning board of tiny projects, but something real. There's going to be some form of parking study. There's going to be some form of water and sewer analysis. There's some form of early work with an architect and engineer on site plans and designs. These are all costs that applicants bear, not knowing whether they'll ever get approval. So all we're doing is we're adding one other cost, which is the cost to hire a scientist to go out there and test whether this is actually a wetland or not, and that would determine if it is what needs to be protected. If it's not, that they can push the boundary, or if we can then amend our map to show that it's just.
All right, let me make an argument that I expect we might hear tomorrow night. So I'm an individual, I'm not a big corporation. I want to build a home or a multifamily home in New Paltz. I've got to hire a scientist to explore if there's a wetland there when there might not be a wetland. And as a small business person or a individual, why should I have to pay a scientist to tell me that this thing isn't a wetland? You tell me that.
Right.
So that's the counterpoint. I'm not embracing that argument, but I can
Right.
I can imagine
To
that.
jump on that, what if there was a situation where they were to say that, we had our scientist come out, he said it wasn't a wetland, and we have reason
Well,
to
that-
believe
that's
that it actually
actually-
is.
That's
Now
the-
we have to
that
hire a
couldn't
scientist.
happen.
Well, no, the scientist would be chosen by the planning board.
But the individual still bears the cost.
They bear the cost, but or you would just use one of the village engineers, Dave Clauser or Rich Ruth would probably go out and test this stuff. But to answer your question is that ecology isn't always common sense, one of the things that's on these maps are called vernal pools, which are basically wet only for a short time in the spring, but they're important breeding grounds for salamanders and frogs and turtles in the lower end of the food chain. Especially because there are some, I believe there are some salamanders of concern that live up by Woodland Pond and others. The last thing we want to do is destroy the breeding ground of these kind of critical in the food chain animals. So what may look like just a damp piece of ground of it in the spring could in fact be one of the most ecologically significant parts of the village. And we can't know that unless we get out there and see it for ourselves.
I think Hudsonia did actually field check most of the wetlands on the map with a few notable exceptions, which the
That's possible. I seem to remember reading in the study that they hadn't, but
there were 3 that they hadn't field checked. One of them, most notably, the little 5 wetlands at Stoney Woods, because the developer didn't let them field check them. But when the parcel came up for development, we field checked them. But most of them are, but they've also changed. I mean, those maps, that map was made before Woodland Pond was developed. And
no, it wasn't. You can see Woodland Pond in the satellite photo.
The Hudsonia study?
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sorry. Maybe I used a more recent photo from that.
Right, so you've updated it that way. And then also the pond actually has gotten bigger. I had a student do GIS around the pond. It's gotten a bit bigger since the beavers have definitely settled there. And then there's a couple of other wetlands that have changed since that was made, since those maps were made. And if you're working on it, I've been over there and seen what's happened. There's another one behind Bosse's, and I think beavers have moved in around there, and that's gotten bigger. But I would also have another question: is that it's one thing. There are wetlands which are maybe not environmentally. I mean, they don't have the sensitive ferns or some of the other plants that normally grow in wetlands, but they still function as flood sinks. So they're still valuable environmentally, even though they might not have the biodiversity that would qualify them for protection in that way.
Was it 1 acre? 1 acre of wetland contains 1 million gallons of stormwater.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know what the update is on the DEC's designating the wetlands in the Millbrook as being contiguous and therefore qualifying for the 12.4 acres because they're connected underground, even if they're not. So they were going to do that. There was some political reason why they hadn't yet updated the maps, but I'm curious as to whether the DEC has updated their wetland maps, which they were supposed to do, I think 4 years ago, but then it just kept getting delayed. And I don't know if they finally did update their wetland maps to include contiguous wetlands. And what I thought was that was going to be designated as 12.4 because of the fact they are connected. And then I have one other question. Were we supposed to qualify for MS4 at some point?
We did.
So that's already in place.
Last week we got the paperwork saying we filled out all the appropriate things and we had to have everything implemented by 2016.
And then I don't know if we're still talking about rain gardens, but it's kind of interesting. I was looking at the village, that strip of village property that's behind Tom's house at the dead end of Center Street, right there. And that would be perfect. We were talking about how perfect that would be of a place for a rain garden because so much water goes through there. I don't know if you've ever walked down Platic Hill after it's been a big storm, but there's like literally a little stream that comes down like between Tom and the other Wells, Farwoods, right across the street. There's a little stream that comes down there practically, and that all goes right into the wastewater system. But if there were a rain garden, the village actually owns that property right behind there. And then, you know, everybody's sort of trying to adjust their water flow. I mean, my place is flooded many times. And it's hard because, you know, the neighbors behind them adjusted, you know, did something with their drainage and the water just went into their property. So one neighbor does something, the water goes into the neighbor's property. So,
Speaking of wetlands,
yeah. But if that's a part of it, if, like, I don't know if you're considering when you're doing this map, thinking about where you might want to put rain gardens in order to, or
No,
not.
totally different silo.
Okay.
That's in the storm drain section of my head. not the wetland section.
Okay.
Yeah.
well, you want to go around the table and see what people want to, you know, are we in favor of making a recommendation to the board that they go with this? Are we opposed? Let's see what people feel.
Was
and-
everyone clear? Did I get everything?
I think so.
I explained it. So,
So, yeah, well, let me spit it back to you and you can tell me if I have it right. So the current state law designates wetlands at 12.4 acres. They come under the secret process for the long form.
and just as a footnote, since 12.4 is a weird number, 12.4 acres is equal to 1 hectare.
Okay.
So it's actually a metric that we don't call it.
Okay.
Anyway,
And
this is
this,
stuff I geek out on.
this law would take any potential wetland and put it in that process, whether it was 12.4 acres or less.
As well as every stream and every pond, all surface water, I guess is a good way to put it. Streams, ponds, the river, and wetlands,
Okay. And
as well as buffer areas.
so, and the county planning board has looked at this and has not looked on it favorably. Has our village planning board?
And they're not favorable. They feel the same way as the town.
They're not in favor of it. I mean, they don't say don't pass it, but they say that there's better ways to do it. It'll be a burden on the applicant.
Yeah.
Some of their arguments don't make sense, like the burden on the applicant, because a wetlands protection law would have the exact same burden as this law when it gets to the planning board. So some of the arguments are nonsensical, which is frustrating. And the reason we don't need the full 90-page law is precisely because we're so small and know where all of our wetlands are. If we didn't know that, we would pass the wetlands law. We would probably pass the same one as the town.
Okay.
So it seems to be procedural arguments, not substantive.
And do we have a wetlands law proposed for the village that's written?
No,
But we have this.
we have this.
But there's one that exists for the town,
Yes,
and it's already been passed.
it's been passed. It went to court. It's is it there again?
Yes,
they
there it
win.
They won,
They won
but
the court. of
Town
appeals.
one and somebody's appealing.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's in. It's yeah. So I guess it's in. So I guess yeah, they now have it. But it's 90 pages that gets us to the same place as this.
How difficult would it be to adapt the town law so that it applied for the village?
I don't know. I haven't read it.
well, so then if we're on the table, I don't have a problem with asking people to fill out a longer form in order to ensure that we are taking the steps necessary to preserve potential wetlands. I actually think that's a great idea. Where I hesitate is if both the county planning board and the village planning board are recommending a different path. I haven't read the 90-page law. You guys are saying that they accomplish the exact same thing. I'm not saying that I want to read a 90-page law or that I would really be able to understand the difference or the similarities between the two. But that would be where my hesitation is if both planning boards, who I presume have read the law, are saying that that's what they would recommend, going that route. I just, without having
Did
seen
you guys
it,
get you guys all got the copies of the village and the county?
attached
What
to
you sent to
this
me, I forwarded to them.
is
Yeah.
the county. I didn't see the village one. I saw why the county would recommend something different. Is it in here?
Yeah.
Then I just didn't see it. But was it this? This is the county.
And remember, these are advisory opinions. There are some opinions of the county, the planning boards, that we would have to have a supermajority overturn. But this is just
I have a question. When you're determining the critical environmental areas,
Is wetlands the only criteria, or are you considering steep
For this
slopes
one.
or,
For this one, yeah.
so,
This was limited to the wetlands.
I see. Because I would think.
We can designate other critical, my first draft had a bunch of critical environmental areas and I stripped them down because one of the requirements of the designated a critical environmental area is that you have a map of it.
Right.
So I just didn't have, rather than hold this law back while I made maps of, half a dozen different things. Like some of the other things that might be critical environmental areas or trees of a certain size could be how buildings that have been historically landmarked. I mean, you could basically wrap the whole village up in type 1 actions if you wanted to do that. But I narrowed the focus just to wetlands for this law.
I see.
So I'm looking at the village's concerns, and they say, why designate all wetlands and buffer areas as CEs rather than just making them type 1 automatically?
We do both.
Okay, why do they need to be?
Critical environmental areas. Because I want to give the Environmental Policy Commission, or hopefully soon Environmental Policy Board, oversight or not oversight, but at least, I guess, stewardship
Okay.
of the critical environmental areas. So I could have just designated it a type 1 action on the local list, but that wouldn't have really put any balls in your court. If I designated a critical environmental area, it requires the planning board to get the written comments of the only group of people in the village organization solely dedicated to protecting the environment as a condition of their making a decision. And there are consequences to disobeying those, or to overriding those. It may even, in some cases, take a supermajority to override the comments of the Environmental Policy Board. So it's redundant only in the fact that critical environmental areas are also type 1 actions. It just happens that we have a list of section of our code, the local seeker, or whatever it's called, and we have a list of type 1 actions already. So it seemed a good place to put it, and did no harm by being redundant. I could have created a whole new section of the code called critical environmental areas, and it would have done the same thing.
Well, when you say that the planning board would be required to come to us as the only board or commission focused on environmental issues, then I guess the question is, what would our role be if somebody makes a request to the planning board and says, I want to do X, but we are on this property? I mean, what is our role there? Are we then, if they're coming to us, are we going now and, you know what I mean? Where do we factor into that? If the reason for making it the CEA was to give us input, what are our grounds for input? Not that we're not a commission built to make environmental statements, but the land specifically, are we supposed to know?
You'd be commenting, I suppose, on the EAF, whether it seemed plausible. You do have access to consultants like the village attorney and the village engineer when things come up, so you could have advice in that sense. I imagine that if the applicant had to hire a wetland specialist, you would have access to them as well to answer technical questions.
So are they then going to have to pay more to their specialist, who's then going to have to speak to us and answer our question?
It could. It depends on the project, or it could just be something that you know yourself, or it could just be that there's no problem with the project at all. And I can't remember, unfortunately, at what point in the process your advice is sought. Do you know that? It's kind of obscure bit of legal trivia.
Will we have to be on the site visit?
Well, since we are a commission and we're not a board, this is all kind of theoretical for me.
Right.
And if
As far as where we are right now, I feel like secret is my nuclear. I really want to say secret, but
Everyone says secret.
yeah, I want to say secret. I can't help it. But as far as where we are now, would it just be a statement of support for the law that you're suggesting? Because the aim of a village planning board is quite different than the aim of an environmental policy commission. So if you're talking about two different avenues to getting to the same place, for me, I wouldn't have a problem in supporting the more expeditious of the two. That being said, I think we've discussed and are aware of the opposition and arguments that would be against it. So suffice to say that I would also be for the 90-page law protecting wetlands. But if this is just a quicker route to that, I wouldn't have a problem supporting it because I think it meets the ultimate goals of an environmental. In other words, it's not our concern whether or not someone has to fill out a form, it's our concern that wetlands are protected. And if this does that, then I don't see how it runs counter to our aims to support it. However, I do imagine there will be people who are not excited about this and may desire the other route, and I can see why that would be. But
The form is really not an issue for me, or asking somebody to fill out a longer form or requiring that of them. I guess right now my concern is our role in it, and then another question came up for me. Doesn't seeker make an environmental impact statement? Who does that? Somebody does that, right? On projects, when there's going to be a project?
If you start the secret process with the environmental assessment form.
Okay.
If the environmental assessment form is a positive declaration that it is going to impact the environment, then you do your environmental impact statement.
Okay. So then I feel like if an environmental impact statement of this magnitude is being done, I feel like our place or my place would be to look at that and say, well, this is positive or negative. I don't know what more we as a commission or board could do than that.
Well, I'll try to look it up, because it's spelled out in the law what the role is. It's not
In the law for us? 'Cause
not the local code, not this.
Okay.
It's spelled out in the secret law.
Well,
It's also worth noting that the applicant is filling out most of the secret form. Sometimes that's not filled out correctly, and this board might catch that, whereas the planning board obviously would want to as well, but to have 2 sets of eyes, 10 sets of eyes, something like that.
Well, I mean, the issues that I think have come up in the past have been that there needs to be some means of our actually having access to the property and inspecting it, because otherwise, there's no way of knowing whether or not they're actually following the procedures and the guidelines that they've agreed to. And the other thing that's come up, I would like to. I mean, if you're talking about protected wetlands, the architect of the wetlands is the beavers. The beavers have to be protected. I mean, you can, if someone has any way of going in and killing them, then that's how they are, or how one attempts to, or how developers have attempted to destroy the wetlands in the past. And we do have a ban on trapping, but it's not. I don't think that it's strong enough because it's only like on village property. But I feel like if you are protecting a critical environmental area based on whether or not it's a wetland, then what you really have to protect is the architect of that wetland. You have to protect the beavers.
well, if you do one, aren't you almost accomplishing that goal by protecting the habitat and protect that the animals that live in it, or?
Yes, but someone could still go in there with a gun, like they did in 2003, and shoot the beavers. And they got
But
permission
they had permission.
from the DEC.
Okay.
Actually, they didn't really have permission. They had permission to do it on one person's property. They did it on another person's property, but that person didn't care. But yeah.
Well, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were
Oh,
done.
no, I'm not. It's just my main concern.
I think that the two positions are not opposed to each other. It's possible to be in favor of a 90-page wetlands law, which doesn't exist right now and can't be put into effect next week. And it's also possible to be in favor of this, which does exist and can be put into effect next week. So I think it makes sense to say, pass this, and then write your damn law. But in the meantime, we would have this as a protection. I think I'm asking some of the questions about the pushback because one of the members of the village board is the former president of the village planning board, and I assume that there's not going to be a great amount of disagreement between his former body and his position. So I'm wondering if we could maybe remove some opposition to this by favoring putting all wetlands and waterways as type 1 automatically. And since we are not a board right now, and it's the issue that our planning board in the village seems to have singled out as taking exception, I wonder if we need the critical environmental area component of that day one, or whether we could say, pass the type 1 law, and when we are at the point where we're moving or talking about moving from a commission to a board, that would be the point to take a look at amending it or changing it.
I think what's being suggested is including that language would force the need for the commission to become a board. So that would be a sort of ancillary benefit of including the language, if I understand it correctly. But I see what you mean.
Yeah, well, and I didn't know that I might be a board and reviewing this stuff before I got here tonight. So I'm not. So I need to think about that part of it. Yeah, not that I'm opposed to it. I just need to think about it.
If you'd like, I can read through the few sentences to tell what a critical environmental area is. There is a difference between that and a type 1 action.
I'm not necessarily concerned about the titles or that wording. What I would like to see more detailed, and I'm not trying to sound selfish, is what that means for this potential board or current commission. What our role is, what we would be reviewing. I just don't want to say that I support, as a member of this board, I don't want to vote for something in support, not knowing what the impact is going to be once that goes through. I don't want to, say yay, and then a week later have 7 binders here and being told that we need to make a decision whether this is environmentally, a good project or not, having not seen land, having not seen maps, having not heard anything. I just want to know, I would like to see more detail about what the CEA aspect of this, because I understand why you don't want it to just be type 1. I understand where you want the Environmental Policy Commission to have input. I mean, you have an Environmental Policy Commission, you would want them to have input in environmental projects or projects that could affect the environment. I would just want to know what that means.
And part of me sort of knee-jerk feels like the role of the commission as it exists would be to push forward policies that immediately affect the environment and protect certain habitats or environments. You know what I mean? This is a rhetorical question, but how urgent is the matter? Does it need to come up immediately? Is it something that we can look at more carefully and cautiously before we issue support in either direction? As to your point about what exactly this entails or means, just generally speaking.
Well,
I'd like to see the map and go look at all the spots.
this
It's the same map. You haven't made much modification on it. It's the same what's on the map.
Any modifications to it.
Okay.
I'm not excited that that we're getting this information. I wish we'd gotten it sooner. And I've been asking I've been trying to think in terms of what will pass, what the village board can accept. And I think that, yeah, that, and I'm, in hearing about the planning board and the discussion at the table here, I guess I would ask the person who's proposing this, and I think that's you, Jason, how much of a victory, or how much of no, not a victory, how much of what you are looking to accomplish would be accomplished tomorrow if the critical environmental area component were not included?
Half.
Okay.
Well,
And it's a deal, and it would be a deal breaker for me to remove it. Because I don't see the point. There was, where is it? So, and I misspoke, apparently. I misspoke. The environmental boards do not have anything to say over critical environmental areas, at least not that I saw. What you would have say over is all the properties listed on that open space index.
is that the type 1?
Nope.
What's the?
We're making right now an open space index, and so creating it, I just found a law that establishes an environmental board, or promotes a commission to a board. And what it is you have an open space index list of all the open, whatever, in our case, parks and whatever undeveloped land there is. The village board adopts it, designates the commission a board, and then any proposal that, any action by the village board or the planning board or the building department that is on one of the village parcels would require your review within 45 days. So, totally different conversation than this now. We can unhitch those two, and the two have nothing to do with each other.
So then to go back to what Don asked, well, I mean, technically asked this, I guess my question is, what then is the point of the CEA being?
Following designation, the potential impact of any type 1 or unlisted action on the environmental characteristics of the CEA is a relevant area of environmental concern and must be evaluated in the determination of significance prepared pursuant to section yada 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 of secret. So what it does is it requires all type 1 actions to take into account the environment. In this case, the wetlands and water courses.
But aren't all
It
type
requires by
1
law the developer to take this into account, rather than leave it up to the planning board to ask them to.
Aren't all type 1 actions required to do that anyway?
No, they're required to fill this out, but they're not required to actually, they're required to fill out a form, but as I understand in the real world, they're not required to back it up with anything.
Right.
Is that, okay?
Yeah.
So type 1 is not required to back this form up with anything unless there's CEA?
Or unless the planning board has questions and doesn't accept it.
It makes the CEA a requirement in that form. You have to address the CEA in that form and before the planning board.
So you
It
can't
has to
just
be-
say, no, there's no environmental impact.
Yeah,
That's
you
where
can't-
that hiring a scientist piece comes in, it then forces
Yeah, and then-
them to actually.
Then they have to, the burden of proof is on them to show that it's harmless,
Did we all get
that what they want to do won't cause harm.
It was emailed.
And all this law does is require, all this law does in the end is require us to check that these areas are not environmentally sensitive before anything gets built on them. That's all it does. It requires that question be answered. And that's the entirety of the law. And in order to do that, in my mind, you need both to designate it as a critical environmental area, to use seeker to, that references in seeker to, which says that it must be a part of the conversation, as well as adding it to our already existing list of type 1 actions. I think this would be the 4th or 5th local type 1 action that we have.
So, and I can see someone interpreting that you must not just fill out the form, you must do the work to show that the form is telling the truth as unreasonable government interference and delay and bureaucracy. I can see that argument being made by someone who wants to develop something.
And keep in mind too, that think about the village, we're 300 years old. If it hasn't been built on yet, there's a reason. So we're actually dealing with issues like this in other arenas of the village. For example, we made all single family and 2-family homes. Did we make them type 1 actions?
No,
No.
we're,
We require them to go before the planning board though.
Right.
Usually, single-family homes and two-family homes don't need to go before the planning board. We just get a permit from the building department. We made sure that they have to go before the planning board because we don't have a lot of space and there's not a lot of good building. All the good building that has been taken up for 300 years. So we have, for example, rezone Route 32 North to be more like Main Street. But if you look at the map, there's a lot of those buffers and wetlands there. So we have to just double check that as we redevelop, which is good, we're not trampling on things that we could easily avoid. And this is the simplest tool that I could come up with to reach that goal.
The last time we tried to get, to submit a map in order to try to get board status, it was derailed by a request that every piece of property in the village that hadn't already been built to its maximum allowed density be listed. And that's kind of a very complicated figure to come up with because it's true that, you know, you're allowed a certain amount of an envelope or a certain amount of density on each piece of property. But not all of them have filled that completely. There are numerous lots in the village that have not been fully, you know, that may have like a half a lot next to them that has no house in it, or that have a part of a lot behind them that, you know, maybe they would be allowed to put a shed on or something like that. So I really don't, I mean, that completely derailed us. But it was an odd figure to try to have to come up with.
I would argue that wouldn't really then be an open space, a typical open space inventory.
No, it wasn't a typical request.
Yeah.
It was onerous, and but I'm just letting you know that we did. I have a map that is incredibly detailed, but I feel like in terms of critical environmental area, if you at least also included steep slopes, because when you have wetland,
I think
they
steep
are
slopes are already type 1 according to local law.
okay. All right, that's.
So I'd like to go around. Let's hold the group and see if we have a consensus here. So we can talk about this for a long time. Who is in favor of making a recommendation to the village board tomorrow that they enact this proposal to make type 1 actions of all wetlands and waterways and to call them critical environmental areas? Show of hands. Okay, that is consensus. So I am, choose my words carefully. Do you happen to know, Jason, who made the request or how this issue was assigned to this commission? Because I just got the email and the information last Friday, a couple days before this meeting.
It came up with the last second at the board table.
Okay.
It might have been Sally actually.
Just
to get your opinion on environmental legislation.
Because it has been difficult getting the information at the last minute and not having all the background to be able to address this complicated issue well. So just, okay. Well, I'll complain tomorrow about that.
Sounds good.
Okay. So going back to our agenda.
Were you all in favor of that?
Yes,
You were.
it was 4-0. And obviously there's, some questions and concerns around the table, which I will communicate to the board if they ask, or even if they don't. We give you an update on signage on the Walkill River. I did pass our short signage to the village attorney that this water has tested positive for fecal matter and has not been determined to be safe for human contact. And I think that change was made. Citizen testing has shown that this water has tested positive. That was the one request from the attorney. He also wanted something to cite on the sign, to cite where this came from. And his request was that we added to the bottom of the sign, for details, go to riverkeeper.org. Seemed great.
I have no problem with that.
Riverkeeper has a huge problem with that.
Oh,
They're not agreeable to that.
even though they did the testing?
The sign's too small, there's not enough data on the sign. They're very comfortable, they gave us a very detailed poster, which had lots and lots of information.
Which nobody will read while they're putting their boat in the water.
I have questions about that actually, and I meant to call to ask them. But I'm curious as to when they, I don't know if anyone here knows this, but when they list the tributaries that they tested for the fecal material, were they testing the tributaries, were they testing the Wallkill itself at the base where the tributary comes into the Wallkill, or were they testing the tributary itself? I'm very curious to know that. You don't know, because that's a critical piece of
Do you want the
information.
email for Jen Epstein? I can give it to you.
That's
Yes,
a
you do. That's
critical,
yes.
that's a critical piece of information, because that's gonna really tell you, what I wanna know is, you know, whether, you know, how dirty the water is when it enters, before it enters the walk.
Can I just put it right here?
Yes.
I had gotten the impression that they were testing in the Wallkill, just because of the way that the way that they described the test was that they were testing the Wallkill at these sites.
At those locations.
So, I mean, they weren't saying we were testing the tributaries. They were
Right.
presenting it as this is how the Wallkill tested.
At the intersection with this tributary,
So,
we tested the water.
I see.
I wasn't there, so I wouldn't swear to that. That was just the way it sounded.
Don, if we don't have the permission to go to Riverkeeper, but we do have permission to use that data that they provided us with, could we instead go to said link at the village?
That's what I was going to
Village
think.
Room,
Yeah,
et cetera.
I think that's the logical thing.
Are they
And
gonna-
and that way people on their smartphone, anyone who's so inclined, would be able to do so on their smartphone there, and who's going to, maybe no one, maybe someone, but that would be a quick fix.
Well, I was going to suggest that we please view signage at Village Hall, but if we could put a link, it's even better.
You can put the QR code.
Or at Village Hall, I mean, depending on the size, see the link, or at Village Hall.
So,
Yeah.
is what we're saying that we're gonna use the wording that they didn't support and then sort
Um,
of subtly cite them, not
No, they were okay with the
specifically?
wording.
They
The only
just
thing,
didn't want
they didn't
their-
want their name listed.
Really?
Because the wording on the short sign was
Wasn't
not
their
specific
wording.
enough and didn't have data on it. And if it didn't have data on it, they didn't want, they agreed with it, but they didn't want their name on something which didn't.
So we could just say, we could have the wording that we all liked and that the attorney was all right with, and then have, for more information,
Yeah.
okay.
Can we, just to double check to your point, can we just double check to make sure that that's kosher with them?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
no,
want
I
them to
Instead
be
of
like
linking
we
to our
said.
site,
Yeah.
and then when they come to our site, we're presenting their data,
Right.
is that? kosher?
And what hasn't come back from the attorney yet is approval of that bigger document, the
Okay.
poster. So,
And that's what they would be referring at,
Yeah.
hypothetically
yeah,
speaking? Okay.
that's got a little bit more
So then
information.
all that has to happen.
So it's all kind of tied together. On a related note, I took a tour last week at 7:30 in the morning of the wastewater plant, and I was really very highly impressed. And those folks said, come look at us, come talk to us, come inspect us. Anything you want to know, come on down, bring the whole town. They were really, they have discharge requirements they're required to meet, and they test every day to test what is going in the river. And they are very open and very, what can we show you? Because nothing's coming from here, this shouldn't be. Now, so it was impressive tour. And what needs to happen, and some of this, a lot of this came from you, Rachel, is we need to test the tributaries. There are more advanced tests than what Riverkeeper does that can distinguish whether it's human fecal material or non-human. Is it coming from people or is it coming from farms? Is it coming from fertilizer? There are tests that can determine what sort of fecal material they're finding. They're
The
expensive.
purpose of that being to determine what it was coming from, what the water treatment plant and what wasn't.
Well, just to find out what's in, we know that there's E. coli or fecal matter in the river. It's a question of where to come from.
Determining.
And if we know it's all human, Well, that whittles it down to 2 or 3 places we could look.
Right.
If we know it's all animal, so it's just it's something. I think we need more data to kind of get our hand on this. We didn't test the tributaries too. And there are a couple points you made. I saved your email that really make a lot of sense.
Whether people's septic systems could be leaking. They're very old.
Yeah.
And they're in the,
So, but I think the first thing we need to do is get signage up there. And the purpose of getting signage up there is to have people say to their government, what are you going to do about this? And so that will be the next step. But I think we put signs up there that will compel action. And I'm starting to think in terms of what that action would be.
Yeah, what are we gonna do about it? Supposing the big angry mob comes in here and demands that we clean the river, how are we gonna do it?
Well, I think the first step would be testing and trying to determine where the sources are. I think it's possible. I think once we determine where it's coming from, and we don't know that with any certainty, with data that we can say, here's the numbers, I think that's the first step. You have to find out, data. You have to get data. It's a scientific thing, and we need information. And we have river keepers giving us good information, but we need to go deeper. They've kind of put out, hey, red flag. New Paltz is worse than anywhere else on the river. And now they've given us their data. Now we need to dive a little deeper, which is a horrible play on words. So that would be the process. I think a year to what I said, and you shot me down, was a year to, well, no, just an email exchange we had. A year to investigate what's in the river, a year to figure out how to address it, and another year to start addressing it. That's the way in 3 years we can, and you were telling me shouldn't take a year to figure out what's in the river because, there has been investigations on that stuff in the past. But until we have numbers and data that we can give to people that they can't argue with, people can argue with us. So I think just getting data will be important that we don't have. Solar street lighting.
You want me to kick us off, or you want to start?
Tag, you're in.
All right. I had contact with 6 different companies and left messages or sent an email to 2 others that haven't gotten back to me yet. Just to sort of give you a brief update of what each one said. Nugent Lightings is actually out of Westchester. That was the closest to us. They won't give us an estimate without knowing the wattage that we need, the battery size, the distance between poles, and the foot candles, which for those who don't know what foot candles is, if I did not, is the amount of light that hits the ground. So like in those cartoons when you see like that circle of light, my understanding is that that's the foot candle. But they did say that it would be very, very tough to keep it under $1,000 per streetlight. Stresscrete is another company. They said the cost depends. Nobody would give me an exact cost. Cost depends on current consumption, sunlight available, and the number of panels needed, but 1,000 is a very low estimate. He said that the only way that he could see it possible to keep it under 1,000 each is if we were just switching to LED lighting. But he said that going off grid will increase the cost significantly. DX3 solar lighting, or maybe it was D by 3, approximately 8,000 for streetlights. For
8,000 per?
With installation. He said switching to LED would be cheaper and save approximately or as much as 80% on the power bill. And he said that LED would be approximately $300 per light. Innovis, I have no idea if that's how you say it. I was actually speaking to earlier today. They said between $1,000 and $5,000 per unit, but that lower end would be retrofitting what we already have in place, the wiring and the poles, and that would be for an on-grid, off-grid option. He sent me an email, which I can forward to all of you guys, which have more details on that option. But basically it was that we would be off-grid during the daytime, and then at night we would go on-grid and use what's generated during the day to supply at night. So he's saying we would use existing poles and affix the solar component and offset the energy usage during the night with the energy from the day. Now I don't know how I feel about this because I know that Jason had wanted to replace the poles entirely. He did not see that being an option.
1,000 was also when we're trying to do it for nothing. I mean, we can't always borrow money.
Okay, so that was actually at the end of this going to be my question is, well, I'll finish these and then I'll present the question. The last one was just that King Luminaire said that it would be very highly unlikely to get it for 1,000, and if someone was offering that, he wouldn't buy it because he wouldn't trust it. then the other ones haven't gotten back to me. My question would be, if it's clear that it is going to be more than 1,000, is that something that the village wants to spend more money on? Is it something that we support spending more money on? Is it worth it to be off-grid? Is it worth it to stay on-grid and go LED lighting and save the money, but we're not off-grid? I mean, I guess one of my questions is the main goal here to be off-grid, or is the main goal here to save money?
Both.
Okay.
Joanna, did you say that the LED would reduce the usage by 80%?
Not the usage, but the cost.
by
Up to
80%?
80%.
Up to 80%, it would cost $300 per light.
That's what they're estimating. One company estimated.
So that's that's something pretty significant.
But we
I mean,
would still be on grid.
we'd still be on grid.
And a number of lights. I mean, I'm sure Central Hudson would be fine if we bought all new bulbs for their lights. But I wonder how many of them are LED already,
Mhm.
and whether you can just, is it just a matter of replacing a bulb? Or does it have to, is there other?
He gave me the contact information for a couple of companies. I could reach out to them and see if there's more to it than just replacing light bulbs, but he presented it as you just need to get the lights.
Right.
He didn't, I mean, there wasn't much more to it as far as he was
So I
saying.
guess it was just talking about the light bulb.
I'd like to.
But you think that we might have some more?
The Central Hudson might be doing it already. I don't know.
I think a good first step would be to see if any of these companies have a salesperson who would be willing to come to either our meeting or a village board meeting.
I did have one say that he would Skype with us. That was actually the,
Guys in Oregon?
no,
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't know who the ones that you hooked me up with were.
Okay.
Innovus. Oh, I have my email already open. It was Dale, I think is his name. Let's see who he's from. Dale Curtis, yep, from Innovus. He is out in, I don't know. He's somewhere else. I thought it was like Idaho or something. Something with an I. Illinois,
Okay.
Idaho, Indiana maybe. One of the I's.
All right, so we have at least one person who's willing to talk to the board.
I think that the guy in Westchester would also be willing to. He was very helpful. He just thought that we needed to know more to answer. Like, because he was the one that wanted like wattage, battery size, space between poles. He needed a lot more information. But the one who, I don't have it on me. I actually do have it on me. The one who recommended the LED lighting and gave me all that information also gave me suppliers information, and I could reach out to them and see if they wanted to Skype it.
Jason, if we were to have someone coming up here, one of these vendors, or Skyping with us, do we know the kind of information that they were asking of Joanna? Okay. Yeah.
One of the things, you had said that you were going to add me to a Google website. Do you know if you did that? Because I don't know how to find it.
Okay.
Were you guys gonna try to contact other municipalities?
That was my assignment, to contact Down at Grove, Illinois. And that's the one thing on my to-do list I didn't do. I was just guilty. My list was like this, and this is on the last page. I just didn't get to that. So I will have that done by next meeting. So my apologies.
If I call Central Hudson and ask them if we have LED lights, will they tell me?
Yep.
All right.
I'm gonna have to excuse myself.
Yeah,
at this
thanks, John.
point, but if,
Appreciate hanging in so long.
Yeah, if there's any major changes to anything or anything I should know, just, if anyone wants to contact me,
Gotcha.
let you know.
Okay. So on that topic, tomorrow we'll suggest that the village board schedule some time to talk by Skype with the
Yeah,
guy.
this group do it first.
Well, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before we did that,
I'd like more
though,
information.
before we did that, I would feel comfortable if we had information about how much we use, the wattage of lighting that we use.
Central Hudson has all that.
All of that? Okay.
Yeah.
So.
John Master John, I think is who you need to talk to.
Do you know how to spell that last name?
So we would have these folks talk to us, and we would, prior to that conversation, have them give us a list of what information they need from us.
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
have,
You pretty much have it?
because they pretty much all ask for the same information,
Okay.
wattage, that kind of thing.
Okay. All right, so we'll try and set them up. If everyone's schedule allows for maybe our August meeting, we can talk to somebody.
I did tell, when I spoke to Dale from Indiana, I did tell him that we'd be having a meeting the 4th week of August, and I would talk to you guys about having him in by conference call or
Excellent.
something.
Okay.
He was on
Good.
board.
All right, so I've got to talk to Dan Grove. And that's what I'll update the village board tomorrow, that we will invite these folks in to talk to us and get them some more information in a month or two. Municipal solid waste pickup. So there's a request for proposal out for vendors to take over the service for a year. And I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's, that probably will be.
Here, you said?
Well, I could granting a one-year contract.
Oh, I see, okay.
And there's also discussion of going to straight municipal solid waste pickup, which is kind of going the whole way there. Jason has been up to Kingston and Watervliet, 2 towns that do this, and I had a long conversation on the phone with Chris Doss from Watervliet, the guy who runs the program, and we pretty much have a lot of the numbers in some of the studies that have been done. He did not have a number for the cost per household, although I'm sure someone in his municipality would have to be able to figure that out. He did not have recommendations in terms of how many bins to buy, because they were they moved to they owned a lot of equipment already, so they didn't have to buy all this stuff from scratch when they went into it. So he didn't really know how to advise us on that. But the questions were, what were the surprises? What are the landmines? What are the things you wish you knew before you did it, and the oh no things? Thank you very much.
I'm coming back.
Oh, okay. He said, surprisingly, there were no surprises. He said it really has gone really well. He based their program based in 8 other towns around them that do this. He said the best benefit from the change has been a lot of stuff that used to be going to landfills. It's not going to landfills anymore. They're able to have control. They're able to have enforcement. There were a lot of situations where businesses in town were putting whatever in the dumpsters, and these private companies weren't looking inside. They just take whatever they gave them. And sometimes on a regular weekly basis, there was stuff going to landfill that shouldn't have. They've really gotten control of what's in the trash. They've taken out the TVs and the tires and things that shouldn't go to the landfill, and that's been the biggest thing. They have not had any issues with the employees. They've had no workman's comp issues in 6 years. They're expanding to now doing food scraps and composting. Let's see. Larger businesses with dumpsters, they have to contract for their own trash pickup. The municipality does not do that, so they have to handle it with a private hauler. I guess they can work with the municipality if they want to, but they're not required to have municipal trash pickup, at least in Watervliet. And they also save money by contracting with a closer landfill, a landfill which is closer to their location, which we might, I don't know where we're taking our trash, but he said that was a tremendous cost savings. But Chris was very responsive. He emailed back, he called back very enthusiastically, and was really, a real cheerleader for the program, which is not in front of the board right now. I think right now the board's looking at an RFP for a private contractor, but I think I'd like to make a recommendation from this board that we go beyond that and that they start putting things in place for going to municipal trash pickup. To go from $400 per household to $150 seems to be pretty much agreed upon.
And it is going to be moving forward. We have one more meeting I'm getting one more meeting together with the principals to go over the report to hopefully have a final draft and then present it to the village board. I'm hoping in August.
Excellent. Well, I guess contracting with a private hauler in the meantime hopefully would have some savings.
It doesn't do any harm in this 1 year.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
lot of the going public would involve budgeting for next year.
right.
You know, planning. You know, it would take some planning. So
Well, I wonder what, on the other side, I wonder if private companies would be interested in buying more trucks and stuff for a contract which might not be going on for a long time.
this
Sure.
is a 1-year contract.
Waste Management would have the trucks, they wouldn't care, but I'm thinking about some of the smaller companies. But, all right, that's, I guess, not our concern right now. Home energy audits?
All right, so one thing that I hadn't asked and I probably should have is, do we want, when we advertise home energy audits as something that can really save people money and be good for the environment, are we encouraging them to go ahead and get a home energy audit? Or are we encouraging them to come to a presentation that we're having about home energy audits? So I spoke to Mike Darcy at Rupco, and he drafted up, or he had already drafted up. I emailed this to you guys, but it was like 2 hours ago, so I'm sure that you didn't look at it. But it's a just basically catchy, bright flyer saying you can save money. This can help you. I don't know if this is something that we want to do because this isn't coming from us. You know what I mean? Like, are we just printing their flyers and hanging them around town? If that's something that we're okay with, that's something that I'm okay with. I did reach out to local, there's also one other thing. So that's sort of the catchy, bright one with some information. And then there's this, which is sort of a step-by-step, this is how you go about getting a home energy audit. And then,
No. Go ahead.
well, they're very open if we wanted to have them give a presentation. I mean, we've never had anybody at our meetings other than you, the people, and Dan. So, I mean, I don't know if that's something where we want to try to get people to come out to an EPC meeting by having a presentation that could benefit the community and encouraging people in the community to come to the presentation. I know that the town has done it. I don't know if that's something that we're interested in. I have reached out to a couple local churches and the local Jewish congregation, and for the most part, they've been very supportive and receptive and said, yes, we'll hang a flyer on our bulletin board. One of them will put it in their newsletter, possibly put it in their newsletter. So I think that once we decide what exactly we want to put out, we have people that will help us. Obviously, we can use Facebook, we can use, these public places or, religious groups. I just think it's a matter of deciding what we want to advertise specifically.
And my thinking would be, I'm not sure how logistics would work, but I, at times, have gotten notices from Central Hudson as part of our bill or whatever. You're using more energy than the other people on your block. At the time, we had a hot tub and a waterbed. We were. Yeah, but it would say your usage is over what it should be. I'm wondering if we can reach out to people who are, if we can identify the people who are being the most inefficient in town, and go after them rather than not go after them in a bad way. Say,
No, I know.
hey,
Hey,
you're
you
wasting your
might be
money.
spending more. Do you want to spend
And
more?
I wonder if Central Hudson would work with us on that.
I wonder if that's
I don't know.
like information that they would give out, or if that's
Might
like,
be a privacy violation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
hey,
Okay.
Central Hudson,
All right.
tell us who in our area is really wasting energy.
Okay. All right. I don't want to be the big brother.
I mean, we
okay,
did
okay.
talk about putting it in the water bills, right, with the village bills. And I think it was you who said that anything else that's in your water bill gets thrown away. You're only looking at one sheet.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's an effective thing. I mean, if it said in big letters, do you want to cut this bill down? Would it make it more appealing? I'm just trying to think of ways that we can target people
Yeah.
who might need it, and I think that in a monthly or in a bi-monthly or bi-monthly,
Well,
Quarterly.
quarterly bill, I need that. I mean, you get a bill, you're already thinking about money that you're now gonna have to spend.
I'm not opposed to it. I was just talking about the
Yeah, for
logistics
you.
with me. I think printing something on the outside of the bill envelope saying energy audit savings information inside. I don't know. That would be
That would-
something. But I'm just talking about me. I may be weird in that regard.
No,
Maybe,
but that,
you know.
that's a good point, that, they see it, they already are looking for it when they open it up. It's not something that they immediately discard. So, I guess for that, that could really just be like a slip of paper stuck in.
And I think if we can, your question is, are we inviting people to come to an informational session or to actually get the audits done?
Right.
I think asking people to take 2 steps and come out to an informational session,
Is easier than giving them a list of, do this.
it's a rough call. It's a rough call.
Yeah, it's a lot of effort to get people to show up for things. I don't know if it's worth it in this case.
Because they have to show up for a meeting and then they need
And they have
to
to do
follow
more.
through. So if we could try and focus on them following through, and please, schedule your contact Central Hudson and see what.
Schedule your free home energy audit and see how you can save. It's sort
Yeah.
of simple. So then, I guess my question is from here, what are we looking at? Do we want to look at something that we can put in the water bills? Do we want to look at something that we can put on bulletin boards at local community centers? Or do we want to look at something that we can put in newsletters? Are those the 3 areas that we're,
I think those are the 3 things. And do we have the funds to
right?
do those things?
Well, as far as flyers for bulletin boards and the newsletters from the people that I've spoken to from those few churches, they'll print them and run them. They said email it to me. And that was very easy. As far as printing something for water bills, that's a different question because that would be on us. I don't see why it can't be as simple as taking a Word document and writing like a 3-line thing, having 10 on a page, and then just paper cutting them. So,
I'll donate an ink cartridge to the cause.
yeah, and like a ream of paper.
Yeah.
This is the one that they sent me from Revco. I didn't think I emailed it to you.
Yes, we'll just move forward to trying to promote that and get the word out.
See what we want to do.
Millbrook Preserve. So we came in with a suggestion that they pass the law.
Wait, can we go back for 2 seconds?
Please do.
When I reach out to those churches and groups, do we want to use something like this where it doesn't have anything to do with us on it? It's just the Rupco flyer saying, here's how you can save money? Or do we want to sort of take information from this and make our own, saying from your local environmental policy commission? Is that reinventing the wheel just for the sake of having our name on it? If this is already,
We don't even have to print that. Won't they just give us copies of that or something?
well, the places that I've spoken to will just have me email it to them and they'll put it up where, they'll post it. They're not even talking about us printing it. I'm just wondering if this is what we want to put out or if
Well-
we want to make our own.
A church is not going to put that in their bulletin, so we need to have up our own content for something like that.
Okay.
So I think if people will take that, that's great, but there are
Okay.
probably going to be situations where it's not going to be applicable,
Right. so
so we should come up with something else as well. I'm very happy to work with you offline, outside of the meeting, and we can
Sounds
just
good.
knock something out. So Millbrook Preserve, we made recommendations that they pass the law, and I'm sorry, just pass, not sorry, wrong terminology. Accept the report, accept the report. And I was extremely frustrated that there was a request to, there have been different people working on this report and contributing to this report since it was first written. Let's get the authors in here and ask them questions. And I just saw that as a delaying tactic.
Who
And
said
I-
that? I'm sorry. The boards?
One trustee said that, and I don't know if I want to point fingers right now. Yeah, a village trustee made the suggestion that they wanted to bring.
The consultants?
No, there were people in town who made some. I guess this document stayed dormant for a number of years, and recently was updated a little bit. Some changes and updates were made to it. And the request was, let's get the people who updated it in here, ask them questions, and let's see what they changed, what they did not change, because the document isn't the same exactly as it was 5 years ago, and it struck me as a delaying tactic. So I would like to recommend again that the village board accept the report, and if they have specific questions that they need answers to, rather than let's come in and open up a whole new thing and the whole ocean is the topic, what specific questions do you have with regard to this that will allow you to accept it or not, rather than inviting people in to reinvent the wheel, and try to narrow it down that way. Because I think if there are specific identifiable questions, we want to know what they are and get them the answers. But if we're just looking at this behavior, which is kind of what I perceived, maybe incorrectly, but I would like to figure out whether we really have questions here or not. And I think the best way to get to that point is to ask what their questions are, put them in writing. We'll get the answers for you by the next meeting, so you can take action and accept this report or not.
Have the maps been updated at all? Are there new maps to look at, or they haven't?
No, it's the same report. The Clean Water Open Space Committee in town is this month reviewing it and are supposedly presenting it to the town and village boards in its final form, which there would be no major changes to it.
So it hasn't actually been presented to the board yet?
No.
Oh, okay. So,
Okay.
It's supposedly happening this month.
Okay. So in anticipation of them having the opportunity to pass it, we would like them to identify what questions they have that would be important for them to know the answers to before they take that vote. And we can get that to the point where something can happen on that. Natural gas at Village Hall. We don't like it. Made that clear. We had dueling statements at the board meeting. And I guess we'll just, watching that digging happen as the pipeline makes its way through the village. So just
As I cannot enter my apartment complex or go to work.
at least we know where it is. It's hard to hide it.
They're doing a terrible job of repairing the street afterwards too. It's awful, especially if you're on a bicycle.
They're not going to win any popularity contests in this room. We've gone through the secret law review. We have the responsibility, each of us, to track down some researchers if we want help looking into some of these things, some of the things you're looking at. Joanna, if you can have someone do some of that legwork for you. If you're willing to do it yourself, that's great, but we do have the ability to bring some other people on. Meeting minutes. I think we saw them. I didn't have any problem with them.
okay.
We want to accept the minutes from last meeting?
Yeah. Yay.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. So I have a note here on the bottom of my agenda. Rachel had mentioned, I don't think it was at a meeting, that it might be a really productive thing. The Department of Public Works in town affects so much of what happens. And it might be a good idea to try to see if we could get them thinking more environmentally in some aspects. I don't have specific examples, but I guess the topic is, do we want to start making some recommendations of identifying areas where there could be some change in procedures, and we might make recommendations on some policies. So, I think that begs the question. Well, specifically, what do you have in mind in terms of what's being done that could be done better? So maybe we can schedule that for next meeting and just kind of brainstorm and stuff.
Okay,
You have some input.
sure, well,
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's getting late. Anything else we want to talk about before we close the meeting?
no.
Okay. I'll be at the village board meeting tomorrow night and
7:30?
7:30.
I'll be there.
And
Probably.
what I have is we're going to suggest that they mirror other municipal laws exactly to the degree they can and pass a plastic bag ban. With the CEQA law, we are in favor of them making all wetlands and bodies of water type 1 actions, and also critical environmental areas as something that can be done immediately while they write their 90-page law. There's no conflict between the two. Okay, we're going to tell them that we're going to have 1 or 2 solar light companies speak to us and educate us and present to us so we can get back to them. I will talk to Downers Grove in the meantime. We're going to propose that they move forward to municipal solid waste as soon as possible. I'll advise them on our discussion and plans on energy audit notification and outreach to the public. And Millbrook Preserve, we'll ask for questions. That's all I got. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.